What happens when Hollywood's most iconic tough guy sits down with one of daytime television's most outspoken hosts and the conversation spirals completely out of control? Today, we're diving into the explosive confrontation that had viewers picking sides and left one of cinema's greatest legends walking off the set in disgust. This is the story of how a routine promotional interview turned into television gold, and why what Goldberg said next will shock you. But before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments who you think was right in this situation. The morning started like any other at The View's Manhattan studio. Clint Eastwood had arrived early, as was his custom, dressed in his signature understated style, a simple button-down shirt and dark jacket. At 94 years old, the legendary actor and director still commanded respect wherever he went, and today was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance for his latest film. The production assistants buzzed around him with the kind of reverence usually reserved for visiting dignitaries, but Eastwood remained characteristically calm and focused. Whoopi Goldberg, however, seemed unusually agitated that morning. Several crew members noticed her pacing backstage, muttering to herself and checking her notes obsessively. As one of The View's most senior hosts, she had interviewed countless celebrities over the years. But something about today felt different. Perhaps it was the recent political climate, or maybe it was personal. But those who knew her could sense the tension building beneath her professional exterior. When the cameras began rolling, everything seemed normal at first. The other hosts, Joy Behar, Sarah Haynes, and the rest of the panel, welcomed Eastwood with their usual enthusiasm. The audience applauded warmly as the Hollywood icon took his seat, that familiar slight smile playing across his weathered features. He had done this dance 1,000 times before, promoting films, discussing his career, charming audiences with his dry wit and understated charisma. The first few minutes proceeded exactly as expected. Eastwood discussed his latest project with a measured cadence that had made him famous, his words carefully chosen, his demeanor respectful but confident. The other hosts asked the standard questions about his process, his longevity in Hollywood, and what kept him motivated after 7 decades in the business. He answered each query with the kind of thoughtful responses that reminded everyone why he remained one of the most respected figures in entertainment. But Whoopi had been unusually quiet during these opening exchanges, a fact that didn't go unnoticed by the studio audience or her fellow hosts. She sat with her arms crossed, occasionally nodding, but contributing little to the conversation. Those familiar with her style knew this wasn't typical behavior. Whoopi Goldberg was known for jumping into conversations, for her quick wit and immediate reactions. Her silence was almost ominous. Then about 10 minutes into the interview, she finally spoke up. But instead of asking about the film or Eastwood's career, she decided to steer the conversation in an entirely different direction. Her voice carried an edge that hadn't been there moments before, and her body language had shifted from casual to confrontational. "Clint," she began, her tone already suggesting this wasn't going to be a friendly question. "I have to ask you about some of the things you've said in the past. There are people who feel that some of your comments have been, let's say, problematic." The studio fell noticeably quieter. This wasn't the kind of question anyone had expected, and certainly not phrased in such an accusatory way. Eastwood's expression didn't change much, but those who knew him well could detect the slightest tightening around his eyes. He had faced hostile interviews before, but usually there was at least some pretense of courtesy. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Whoopi," he replied evenly, his voice maintaining that calm, measured tone that had served him well throughout his career. "Perhaps you could be more specific." But Whoopi wasn't interested in being diplomatic. She leaned forward in her chair, her voice becoming more pointed. "Oh, I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. Your political views, your comments about certain groups of people. Don't you think you have a responsibility given your platform to be more careful about the messages you send?" The other hosts exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. This wasn't what they had discussed in the pre-show meeting, and it certainly wasn't what Eastwood's representatives had agreed to. Joy Behar tried to interject with a lighter comment about Eastwood's films, but Whoopi wasn't having it. No, Joy, I think this is important, Whoopi continued, her voice rising slightly. We can't just sit here and pretend that words don't have consequences. We can't just ignore the impact that celebrities have when they choose to use their influence irresponsibly. Eastwood's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. For a man known for his self-control, this was equivalent to shouting. He sat down the coffee cup he had been holding and looked directly at Whoopi, his pale blue eyes steady and unwavering. "Whoopi," he said, his voice still calm, but carrying a new weight. "I've been in this business for 70 years. I've always believed in treating people with respect, regardless of their background or beliefs. If you have specific concerns about something I've said, I'm happy to discuss them, but I won't sit here and be lectured based on vague accusations." The tension in the studio was now palpable. Camera operators zoomed in slightly, sensing that something significant was happening. The audience, which had been chattering quietly among themselves, fell completely silent. Even the crew members backstage stopped what they were doing to watch the monitors. Whoopi's response was immediate and sharp, cutting through the studio tension like a blade. "Oh, please, Clint, don't play innocent with me. We both know exactly what kind of rhetoric you've supported over the years, and frankly, I find it insulting that you would come on this show and act like you don't understand what I'm talking about." Her tone had shifted from confrontational to outright hostile, and the other hosts were visibly squirming in their seats. Sarah Haynes attempted to redirect the conversation once again, suggesting they discuss Eastwood's directing techniques, but Whoopi cut her off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "No, Sarah. This is exactly the kind of conversation we should be having. This is what real journalism looks like, not just softball questions about movies." Whoopi's voice was getting louder now and her gestures more animated. "I'm tired of giving platforms to people who use their celebrity status to promote divisive ideologies and then hide behind their fame when they're called out for it." Eastwood remained remarkably composed, though his posture had straightened slightly. When he spoke, his words were measured and deliberate, each one chosen with the precision of a master craftsman. "Whoopi, I came here today to talk about my work, not to be ambushed with personal attacks. If you have issues with my political beliefs, that's your right, but I won't be spoken to like this on national television." "Personal attacks?" Whoopi laughed, but there was no humor in it. "This isn't personal, Clint. This is about accountability. This is about using your voice responsibly. You've had decades to influence people, and some of us think you've used that influence poorly." The studio audience was now completely silent, hanging on every word. Some viewers could be seen shaking their heads while others nodded in agreement with different parts of the exchange. The camera captured every micro-expression, every subtle shift in body language that revealed the true depth of the conflict unfolding before them. Joy Behar made another attempt to restore some civility to the proceedings. "Look, maybe we can all take a step back here and remember that we're all professionals trying to have a conversation." But Whoopi wasn't interested in stepping back. If anything, she seemed energized by the confrontation, leaning even further forward in her chair. "No, Joy. I'm not going to step back. I'm not going to pretend that everything is fine when it's not. Clint, you want to talk about respect? How about showing some respect for the communities that have been hurt by the kind of rhetoric you've endorsed?" Eastwood's eyes flashed, and for the first time since the interview began, his famous composure showed the slightest crack. "I have never in my entire career said anything intended to hurt anyone. I've worked with people from every background imaginable, and I've treated them all with dignity and respect. I won't have my character assassinated by someone who clearly has an agenda." "An agenda?" Whoopi's voice rose to nearly a shout. "My agenda is truth, Clint. My agenda is holding people accountable for their words and actions. And if that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe you need to take a long look in the mirror." The other hosts were now openly uncomfortable, with Sarah Haynes looking toward the producers off camera as if pleading for intervention, but the producers seemed content to let the drama unfold, recognizing the television gold they were witnessing. This wasn't scripted conflict. This was real raw emotion playing out in real time. Eastwood stood up slowly, his full height commanding even more presence than his seated position had. At 6 feet 4 inches, even at his advanced age, he was an imposing figure. His voice, when he spoke, carried the authority of someone who had commanded respect from presidents, fellow actors, and audiences worldwide. Whoopi, I've been nothing but respectful since I walked into this studio. I've answered questions about my work. I've been courteous to your colleagues, and I've tried to have a civilized conversation. But I will not sit here and be lectured by someone who seems more interested in creating controversy than having a genuine discussion. Sit back down, Clint, Whoopi demanded, her own voice now matching his in intensity. We're not done here. You don't get to just walk away when things get uncomfortable. That's exactly the kind of privilege I'm talking about. The word privilege seemed to hang in the air like a challenge. Eastwood stopped moving toward the exit and turned back to face her directly. His expression had hardened considerably, and when he spoke, his voice carried a cold edge that those familiar with his film work would recognize. Privilege, he repeated the word slowly, as if tasting something bitter. I've worked for everything I've achieved in this life. I've earned my reputation through decades of hard work, integrity, and treating people fairly. I don't need lectures about privilege from someone who seems to think that shouting down guests is good television. Whoopi shot back immediately, her voice now at full volume. Don't you dare try to turn this around on me. I'm doing my job as a journalist, asking the hard questions that need to be asked. Just because you're used to everyone kissing your feet doesn't mean you get a pass from me. Kissing my feet? Eastwood's eyebrows raised slightly, and there was something almost dangerous in his quiet tone. Whoopi, I've never asked anyone to kiss my feet. I've simply asked to be treated with the same basic respect that any human being deserves. Something you seem incapable of providing. The exchange had now completely devolved from an interview into a personal confrontation, with both participants seemingly forgetting they were on live television. The audience watched in stunned silence as two entertainment legends engaged in a battle of wills that neither seemed willing to lose. Whoopi stood up from her chair, pointing an accusatory finger at Eastwood. You know what your problem is, Clint? You're so used to being the tough guy, the man with no name who doesn't have to answer to anyone, that you've forgotten what it means to be held accountable for your actions and words. Eastwood's response was swift and cutting. And your problem, Whoopi, is that you've confused being loud with being right. You've mistaken aggression for journalism and personal attacks for professional discourse. This isn't accountability. This is a witch hunt. The word witch hunt seemed to trigger something even deeper in Whoopi, and her face flushed with anger. A witch hunt? Are you serious right now? This is exactly what I'm talking about. The moment someone challenges you, the moment someone asks you to take responsibility, you play the victim card. I'm not playing any cards, Whoopi, Eastwood replied, his voice now carrying the full weight of his years and experience. I'm simply pointing out that this entire exchange has been unprofessional from the moment you opened your mouth. You invited me here under false pretenses, and now you're trying to turn it into your personal soapbox. The other hosts had given up any pretense of trying to control the situation. Joy Behar sat with her mouth slightly open, clearly shocked by the turn of events. Sarah Haynes was looking back and forth between the two combatants like a spectator at a tennis match. The producers, meanwhile, were frantically signaling to keep the cameras rolling, knowing they were witnessing television history in the making. Whoopi took a step closer to Eastwood, her finger still pointing accusingly. False pretenses? I told you exactly what this show is about. We ask hard questions here, Clint. We don't just let celebrities come on and promote their projects without addressing the real issues. And the real issue is that you've spent years supporting politicians and policies that hurt people. What politicians? What policies? Eastwood's voice remained steady, but there was an unmistakable challenge in his tone. You keep making these vague accusations without providing any specifics. If you're going to attack my character on national television, at least have the courage to be specific about what you're accusing me of." Whoopi's response came quickly. Too quickly, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "Oh, you want specifics? How about your support for candidates who want to roll back civil rights? How about your comments about certain communities that many people found offensive? How about the fact that you've used your platform to normalize viewpoints that marginalize vulnerable people?" Eastwood's expression grew even more serious, and his voice took on a tone that those who had worked with him would recognize as his final warning before all diplomacy ended. "Whoopi, I have never in my entire life said or done anything to marginalize anyone. I have worked with actors, directors, and crew members from every conceivable background, and I have treated each and every one of them with respect and dignity. If you have evidence to the contrary, present it. Otherwise, stop making libelous statements about my character." "Libelous?" Whoopi laughed harshly. "Now you're threatening to sue me? That's rich, Clint. That's exactly what someone does when they know they can't defend their actions on their merits." "I'm not threatening anything," Eastwood replied coldly. "I'm simply stating a fact. You are making false statements about my character and my beliefs on national television. That's the definition of libel." The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point. Several audience members were now whispering among themselves, and a few looked genuinely uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. The camera operators continued to capture every moment, zooming in on facial expressions and body language that spoke volumes about the depth of the conflict. Whoopi seemed to realize that she had perhaps pushed too far, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. "You know what, Clint? I think we're done here. If you can't handle being asked tough questions about your beliefs and your record, then maybe you're not the man I thought you were. Maybe the tough guy image is just an act." That final insult seemed to be the last straw for Eastwood. He straightened to his full height, and when he spoke, his voice carried a quiet authority that filled the entire studio. "Whoopi, I've been asking you for specific examples of these supposed offensive comments and harmful policies for the past several minutes, and you've provided nothing but vague accusations and personal attacks. That tells me everything I need to know about the validity of your claims." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "I came here today as a courtesy to talk about my work and maybe entertain your audience. Instead, I've been subjected to what can only be described as a character assassination attempt by someone who seems more interested in grandstanding than in having an honest conversation." Whoopi started to interrupt, but Eastwood held up a hand, and the gesture was so commanding that she actually stopped talking. "I'm not finished," he said quietly, but with unmistakable authority. "In my 94 years on this earth, I've learned that you can judge a person's character not by what they claim to believe, but by how they treat others, especially when they disagree. Today, you've shown your true character, Whoopi. And it's not pretty." The studio was now so quiet that the hum of the cameras and lighting equipment could be heard clearly. Every person in the room seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Eastwood began walking toward the exit, but Whoopi couldn't let him have the last word. "That's right, Clint. Walk away. Run away when things get too real for you. That's exactly what I expected from someone like you." Eastwood stopped at the edge of the set and turned back one final time. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, but it carried clearly throughout the silent studio. "Someone like me? You mean someone who believes in treating people with dignity and respect? Someone who thinks that civil discourse is preferable to shouting matches? Someone who believes that accusations should be backed up with evidence rather than just volume?" He shook his head slowly, a gesture that somehow conveyed both disappointment and finality. "Whoopi, I feel sorry for you. I really do. Because somewhere along the way, you've confused being controversial with being important and being loud with being right. That's a sad way to spend a career." With that, Clint Eastwood walked off the set of The View, leaving behind a stunned studio audience, shell-shocked co-hosts, and one very angry Whoopi Goldberg, who was still pointing at his retreating figure. The cameras captured every step of his exit, the dignity in his posture never wavering despite the chaos he was leaving behind. As the studio buzzed with confused chatter and the producers scrambled to figure out how to fill the remaining airtime, one thing was crystal clear. Viewers had just witnessed one of the most explosive confrontations in daytime television history. The legendary Clint Eastwood had been pushed too far by a host who seemed more interested in creating controversy than conducting a professional interview. So, what did you think of this incredible confrontation? Was Whoopi Goldberg out of line with her aggressive questioning, or was she just doing her job as a journalist? Did Clint Eastwood handle the situation with class, or should he have stayed and continued the fight? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. What other celebrity confrontations would you like to see covered?